Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I appreciate you all being here and the members of the media who are here to report these important developments to our community. I want to thank Secretary Cohen, Secretary Regan, and most importantly, Governor Roy Cooper for being here today. I think I speak on behalf of this legislative delegation and Chairman Williams and Chairman Brown and the others represented in the room when I say that what we've heard is very encouraging. We know that this governor and his staff are on the right path. We look forward to him telling you more details here in a moment, and we look forward to continuing to partner with him to make our drinking water here in this community the safest it can possibly be. Thank you all very much for being here. Governor Roy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here with my Department of Environmental Quality Secretary, Michael Regan, and my Department of Health and Human Services Secretary, Dr. Mandy Cohen, along with legislators and other elected officials. I'm here to talk about protecting the water in the Cape Fear River. I've just completed a briefing with local, state, and federal officials, and we were joined by county managers and water system officials, as well as people from my staff. And I want to first thank everyone for working on this issue. You know, sometimes it's easy to take safe water for granted. I assure you that I do not. And when a time like this happens, it reminds us of the importance of our water and how critical it is to protect it. Last month, I directed my Department of Health and Human Services and my Department of Environmental Quality jointly to investigate the discharge of the compound GenX into the Cape Fear River. They took swift action, and now Chemours has stopped discharging GenX. That compound is now being contained and incinerated without discharge into the river. As a result, as a whole, the levels of GenX are steadily trending downward, and tests are ongoing to make sure we keep monitoring and to make sure those levels go in the right direction. Now, people here have questions and concerns, and rightly so. They're some of the same questions that I asked my staff when I heard about this last month. Why is GenX being discharged into the river? Will it have health effects? What about other compounds that are being discharged? Can I drink the water? I have directed my administration and the people that work for it to perform their work as if they and their families would be drinking this water. And that's certainly how I approach it. Today, I want to lay out some concrete steps that the state has taken and will take to address the issue of water quality and to address your concerns. First, as you may know, Chemours has applied for a new permit that is pending. I want to make it clear today that the Department of Environmental Quality is going to deny Chemours' request and to deny their permit to release GenX into the river. Chemours has shown that it can capture and incinerate GenX without discharging it into the water, and the company must continue to do that. Secondly, I want to know if any criminal violation has occurred here. I have directed the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation to assess whether a criminal investigation is warranted here. The State Bureau of Investigation will work with the State Department of Environmental Quality and the federal EPA to determine if there is evidence of criminal violations of the permit or of the federal consent order that allows the discharge of GenX that is in place, or of any other violations. Back when I was a state legislator, I wrote and got passed a bill that it made it a felony to knowingly violate clean water standards. That bill remains law today, and its use is available to prosecute environmental crimes if they occur. Third, to address the health issues and the long-term issues, I have spoken personally with the director of the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Brenda Fitzgerald, to request a public health assessment to review any potential long-term health effects from GenX. The CDC has the expertise to conduct complex exposure modeling that will give residents a better understanding of any potential health risks from the last 30 years. She has told me that they will begin these studies. Local, state, and federal authorities will need to work together to provide all of the available data that they have to the CDC so that this report can be as comprehensive and as effective as possible. Fourth, I've spoken personally as well with the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, to again request that they move swiftly to complete a health assessment that will help us and other states set regulatory standards. Administrator Pruitt and I discussed the federal consent order that allows Chemours to release GenX in the first place, and he is looking into whether that consent order needs to be updated and tightened. Currently, the federal consent order allows Chemours to discharge GenX not as they manufacture it, but as a byproduct with no set levels. Now, here in North Carolina, with the GenX flow stopped, I know that many remain concerned about other unregulated and emerging compounds that may be in the water. I'm concerned too, as are people all over the country. This is a state and national issue that we must address. So as a fifth step, our Department of Environmental Quality here in North Carolina will require enhanced disclosure for companies who seek permits. We want to make sure that we know about all of the chemicals or compounds that are being discharged and that these compounds are not disguised. And as a sixth step, I'm also expanding the scope of our Science Advisory Board to work on issues surrounding these unregulated compounds to determine what they are and whether they are threats to the public. This is a challenge, and one that the federal government and states across the country are grappling with. We want to use the law to the fullest and best effect, and we will do that. And one tool that we have is that as technology has evolved, so too have our detection and our testing capabilities that we never had before. That means that we can and do discover compounds in the water way before their effects are even known. This Science Advisory Board will be equipped to examine the science, and help us better understand these emerging compounds so that they can be regulated as necessary. Finally, I think that this issue has brought to light the need for more state water inspectors scientists, and people who review permits for the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. The massive cuts over the last few years and the loss of employees hurt our ability to protect the water all over our state. When the legislature returns in August, and I'm pleased that I've had very positive discussions with both Republican and Democratic legislators here today, we will be putting forward legislation that asks for emergency resources to hire more inspectors, engineers, environmental specialists at the Department of Environmental Quality, and to create a water health safety unit in the Division of Public Health. This water health safety unit will help us determine health levels and to help us protect our water. I think it's pretty clear that anxiety of this situation, about this situation, is here, and I think that that anxiety is understandable. The first priority of my administration is to do everything in our power to make sure that drinking water is protected. And you will hear from her today, but state health officials and scientists tell me that people here can continue to drink the water, and I assure you that we will continue to rely on experts as we make decisions and take new steps. At the same time, we have to make sure that we know how this happened with GenX and what we can do to make sure that our water is protected in the future. That will require us all to work together. I'll be back in the Wilmington area soon. Our officials have been talking to local officials on a daily basis. We are working now closely with the federal government as well. And we'll want to make sure that you and staff down here are receiving regular updates, and I'm going to get regular updates. Getting this right is critical. So my administration is working on this issue day and night. I'll be glad to take questions that the media has first, and then maybe audience members. Yes, Bo.
Governor, the drinking water that's out there right now, is it safe?
So what I just said is that families can continue to drink the water, but I'm going to have Dr. Mandy Cohen, who is the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, to directly answer that question.
Thank you so much. Good morning. As you know, we are happy that Chemours has stopped discharging GenX into the water. We've seen those levels come down. We're happy with that trend. As you know, my department has set a public health goal, and we're seeing levels either below or nearly below that level. And let me, while I have the opportunity, explain when we set that public health goal. It is for a lifetime risk of exposure to something like GenX. That means 70 years of exposure to that. So on any one day, that exposure is really just that, one day, and we set that for a lifetime exposure. So again, happy that GenX is no longer being discharged. We're seeing those levels come down, and that's why I'm comfortable saying that folks can continue to drink the water. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, sir.
How concerned are you about the cutbacks at the EPA in Washington and what impact that might have trickling down to the state's role with environmental quality?
We ought to be ramping up the number of scientists, water inspectors, engineers, and health officials that help ensure clean water. That ought to be ramped up on the federal as well as the state level. I've been deeply concerned about these cuts over the last few years. We shouldn't have to have a public health situation in order to get those resources, but I'm pleased that members of the General Assembly I've talked to here today will help us move forward, and that's one of the reasons why I personally engaged the administrator of the EPA so that he could make sure that his resources were brought to bear and that we had all of the information that the EPA has. I think that's been a problem that we've seen in this situation of making sure we get all of the information that they have, all of their health assessments. Clearly, something went on in 2009 when this consent order went into place, and they made a deliberate decision not to allow chemours in the water from manufacturing it, but allowing chemours in the water as a byproduct. There has to be something there to let us know, and we have gotten information from the EPA that our public health officials have used to set this standard. Now, what we want to do is to continue to greatly reduce and hopefully almost eliminate GenX from the water if you stop people from putting it in the water. So that's what's going to happen going forward with this chemours permit. Yes, sir.
Governor, over the last several weeks, there's been some back and forth over what authority the DEQ had, and it's given its guidance from the EPA.
Yep.
What led to the determination to go ahead and deny commercial permit?
Well, first, we wanted EPA to engage, and it is important for EPA to provide us with all the data and to set regulatory standards, because we can use that in our ability to be successful in setting standards. But our officials have come to the conclusion that since chemours can incinerate this without discharging it into the water, then our permit should deny that. And there are enough health concerns about it that it should be denied. So we're going to prevent any more GenX from going into the water from the chemours plant, but we also need to deal with these other unregulated compounds that are emerging, about which we have very little information or health data. And it's important for us to know what they are, to use the law to the fullest effect to protect the water, and that's what we intend to do. Yes?
Has Chemours responded in any way yet to the Attorney General's demand, investigative demand?
Well, I've talked to the Attorney General, and he has provided a civil investigative demand to Chemours. I do not know if they have responded, but we are also going to work with the Attorney General to get as much information as we can, both from the State Bureau of Investigation, from the Attorney General, to help us assess what has happened and to help us deal with the future going forward. Yes, sir.
Given the nature of what you just told us, what was discussed in this meeting, why did it take so long for this meeting to come together, and why was it held behind closed doors?
Well, first, it's a regular occurrence for me to come to a city or a county and to meet with local officials and have a full and frank discussion about issues of the day. This happened to be one that was a very public one. We made sure that a reporter with the Star News was in the meeting so that anything that was said in the meeting could be reported. And I know that any of us would be glad to say what was said in that meeting here in the public. And I also try, every time I go somewhere, to make sure that I meet with the public and the media and to get questions. Know that since we found out about it, our people have been working every single day with this. They've been on daily calls with people who are here. They have been giving me regular updates, and I've been asking my questions and giving them advice. So we have been moving forward, and this is just really a beginning here. This is an important step for us, but it's also the beginning of a process that I will hope will ensure that we protect the water in the future.
Why is the state beginning happening 7 weeks into this whole thing?
It began earlier than that. We began our conversations with health officials and local government officials here on a daily basis. We've had conversations with the EPA. It has been happening since the moment we found out about it.
Governor,
Yes.
since we understand the county even offered to televise the briefing, what would the harm have been in offering that to the citizens to show the work that's been taking place over the last 7 weeks since you've all been discussing these days?
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty clear what has been happening and the discussions about what have been happening. And we wanted to make sure we had an opportunity for a full and frank discussion with local officials, and it's in my normal course of business is what I do when I go to an area. I'll sit down with the local elected officials and leaders to talk to them. Yes, sir.
Do you feel like you have a commitment from the legislators here and from the leadership to restore some of the funding to DEQ and for the emergency plan that you're talking about? Do you have a price tag on that yet?
We will be getting that information specifically. We've talked about the individual, and I've told them to be fiscally responsible about this, as I always want them to be, and give us what you need, but we're running that through our budget people. Maybe I'll have Michael Regan and Dr. Cohen to give us a little preview of what we need and what we'll be asking for.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. At first blush, what we'd like to do is we were asked to reduce our salary cap by $1 million. So that's $1 million in targeted salary cuts. We would like for that not to have to occur as part of the legislation or the budget that just passed. Secondly, we have some sampling and analysis that need to occur to continue to follow the GenX trend, but also look at other unregulated pollutants. So there's a dollar amount there that's just under $1 million as well. And third, the governor mentioned that we need to ramp up on engineers, on scientists, on chemists, and a few other positions. And so that number is slightly under $1 million as well. So that's where we are in our preliminary analysis. DEQ has taken significant cuts over the past 5 to 6 years. So this by no means is a perfect number, but this is a conservative number that would get us in fighting shape.
Dr. Cohen.
Yes. Just briefly, we're hoping to set up a water safety unit within the Division of Public Health. That's another couple of senior scientists, toxicologists, an epidemiologist, and a health educator. So a bit more of a modest ask than our colleagues in DEQ, but an important one to make sure we have the science we need to inform the public.
Mr. Gilbert.
Governor, how many people from the point of discharge to the plant in Fayetteville down to Wilmington were impacted? And has anyone done an analysis to see the impact on the aquatic life based on the amount of GenX that was put into the river?
Well, first, we've asked the Center for Disease Control to do a health assessment of what has happened with GenX in the water to determine if there is a long-term threat. I don't know if either one of you all have any other thing to add to that.
So this, as I've mentioned, the science here on GenX is pretty slim. We have some studies that were done in rats and in mice. What we know about the bioavailability and the half-life of this compound is that we are not seeing it accumulate. But again, we need a lot more information and data, but which is why we feel comfortable, again, continuing to recommend that people can continue to drink the water, continue to eat the fish. And again, we continue to do more work and need more science in this area.
Yes. Oh, let me get somebody who hasn't any other media. Or media? Okay, I'll come back to people. People are better than the media, I'm just telling you that, but just to make sure I get all my media questions first. Okay, yes, sir.
Quick question, is there anything residents can do? I know you're saying it's safe to drink the water. Is there anything that they can do filtration-wise to keep this out of their water?
So at this time, as I said, continue to drink the water. We're seeing those GenX levels come down below this very, what I would say, very conservative and aggressive goal that we want to be underneath. And again, it's something about lifetime risk, 70 years of risk, and we set it at a level that is protective even for bottle-fed babies, as if they're going to be bottle-fed for 70 years. So really conservative here. But what I would say about filtration system is that we aren't recommending filtration systems, mostly because we haven't seen one that is able to filter out the GenX and has gone through those studies at this point. But again, continue to look at that issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Governor Cooper, in your time in public office and as a state official of any kind, how does this rate as a potential public health scare?
Well, I'm deeply concerned about these emerging compounds that we know very little about. One of the things that I want the Science Advisory Board to get for me is what are the effects of these compounds? How do they interact with each other? What are the levels that we should see for these compounds, if any? And for us to use the law to our fullest extent to be able to protect the water. This is what I want to see. And I think that we're at an important juncture here to make sure that we all work together on this. I think I got a spirit of real cooperation among everybody wants to see us succeed here. And people in the Cape Fear know that this is an issue for the entire state of North Carolina to make sure that our water is protected. So it's important.
Do you remember another environmental issue in your time that has caused the level of this kind of investigation and response?
Well, when you live right here and when you're drinking this water, this is a big deal. And as the governor, it's a big deal to me. So I want to make sure that people know that we are working on this and that we want to make sure that we do the right things here. Yes.
Governor, this whole discussion, do you believe that this should have happened sooner? Would you have liked to have seen communities advised sooner? And I also wanted to ask you about those other unregulated compounds that you're talking about. I don't know if you or somebody could elaborate on that. What are you talking about there? What are these other unregulated compounds? And are there other communities beyond the Cape Fear in the state?
I'm going to let Dr. Cohen, I'm going to let you handle that one if you will.
Sure. So a couple of items there. So in terms of the other compounds, they are other parts of a family of compounds that folks are working through. And what I would say is that while I was mentioning we have very little science on GenX, but we're acting on what we have even less scientific evidence around some of these other compounds. We've actually combed through the evidence and are not able to set health goals for those, which is why I think the governor has asked the CDC for additional information. We want any additional information EPA may have about these emerging compounds, and then to use our science advisory board to prioritize, because if there are a number of compounds, are there ones that we should focus our attention on first? And so I think these are the steps that we want to put in place going forward.
And
Yeah.
about should communities have been notified sooner?
Well, we know what we know now, and we're acting. We're taking action. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You.
Concerning the permit, what's in the permit that gave Kenmore's the right or the liberty to discharge chemicals in the water? I need to know the content in the permit.
There was a federal consent order that allowed Kenmore's to discharge GenX as a byproduct. We're stopping that, and that is not going in the water anymore. Mr. Kelly.
To follow up on the filtering question,
Sure.
I'm starting to see advertisement targeting at the population to say, hey, reverse osmosis, there are different filters that you can purchase. Is this one of these situations where your office is going to be looking at folks maybe trying to take advantage of the scare right now to get people to purchase something that maybe won't help them at all?
I certainly will talk to the Attorney General and the Consumer Protection Division about that kind of thing. We don't want people taking advantage of people to waste any money for that. Yes.
Have you had any discussions with Chemours directly?
No, I've not.
What message do you have for them?
But I do know that my staff, obviously they have to.
What do you have to say to the company itself?
I say to them, they better stop putting GenX in the water, and there should be complete disclosure and transparency about what they're going to do in the future.
What are the consequences if they don't?
Well, it depends on what happens, but obviously we're going to use the full force of the law to make sure the law is enforced. Yes, sir.
Can you detail what the SBI is going to be looking into?
I want them to determine if there is evidence that I want them to assess whether a criminal investigation should occur, and I think it should be widespread. It should include the permit, it should include the federal consent order, and any other issue that the SBI would determine would be. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to call on you now. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, regarding your request to the CDC on the effects of GenX in the water, are you also asking in that request for an in-depth investigation of these unregulated compounds?
I'm going to let Dr. Cohen talk about that.
Yes, in our conversation with the CDC last week, we wanted them to look at GenX, obviously most urgently, but then they are aware that there are a number of other compounds, and they're looking at hundreds, and what we're trying to have them do is prioritize the ones that we're seeing in our water first. Obviously, the governor expressed our sense of urgency around GenX to do this work. What I would want to also share while I have the opportunity is that our folks in the department, while they can't do the complex exposure modeling, we did look at incidents of cancers in and around the Cape Fear River. And what we saw, no matter how we sliced and diced, we didn't see any unusual patterns of cancer. We all know cancer is caused by a lot of different things, smoking and others. But that was at least reassuring to me as a physician that I didn't see any unusual patterns related to there. But that's where the CDC can then take the ball and do the next level of analysis for us, which is what we really need here and hope them to do, not just on GenX, but these other emerging compounds. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
You guys have been able to link GenX to the Kenmores, but do you know what other links there are to these other emerging compounds? Do you know, are there other industries that you guys are aware of that are causing this byproducts or what have you of these emerging compounds?
I'll let either Dr. Cohen or Michael, you want to take that?
In terms of GenX, we've combed through our permits, and we do not believe that there are any other sources of GenX being released. We're double and triple checking that. In terms of the family of unregulated compounds associated with GenX, we're doing the same. We're combing through each and every one of our permits to be sure that there are no other releases occurring.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering about representation. As far as your panel, could you consider this a private meeting? I see no representation as far as the African American community on a grassroots level. My question is why?
Well, we met with local leadership, county commissioners, the city, and with county managers. One of the things that I believe in is diversity. I've appointed the most diverse state cabinet in the history of our state. I believe that state government should look like the people that it represents. And we will continue to make sure that diversity is represented. And I want to make sure that our administration reflects that as a priority. Yes, ma'am.
From a legal perspective, you said that there was a federal consent order that allowed Chemours to discharge GenX, and now you're looking to see if they broke the law in any way. If they had a consent order to do it, how would they have broken the law? And what authority can the state trump the EPA?
Well, number one, that is what we want the SBI to find out. There are a number of things that could happen that could potentially be in violation of a consent order or a permit, and there can be potential state charges, but we don't know yet. Let me preface by saying this is an assessment of whether a criminal investigation is warranted here, and I think it's important that I say that, but I also want them to be very thorough about looking at those questions that you just asked me, and they plan to. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, first of all, thank you very much for coming. I think this gives us an opportunity to take a breath for you. We've talked about the impact on the water. We're not talking about the impact on the air. And the folks have talked about incineration. One of the concerns that I have and that we've shown through the anti-Titan movement is that Titan got a pass on the water, but then we had to take it around and voice our concerns about the air. Do you see any opportunity to have the water quality and air quality folks start to work together and have a one process?
I think that is a good idea because often bad air when it rains and other ways can potentially cause bad water. So one of the things that I want to do is to encourage communication between air and water and public health officials, and that's something that I talked about with my secretaries, and I think that's a valid point as we look at all of these permits across the state moving forward.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Yes.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Harper Peterson. I represent Clean Cape Fear, and I think I may represent some other grassroots efforts in our community. Yes. Some of those being Wilmington Organizing Women, Wilmington Against GenX in Our Water, Cape Fear versus Chamorros, a Wilmington Progressive Coalition. Over 250,000 people in our community, and I'd like to direct my comments to Dr. Cohen, please, are drinking water that has GenX in it. We found out about this 7 weeks ago. Just to frame my question to you, your safe level 4 or 5 weeks ago was close to 70,000 points per trillion and not dropped dramatically to 140. I'm very interested in the methodology, how you got from here to here. Sure. Second, GenX is a close cousin to C8, a known carcinogen that causes cancer. And a lawsuit of civil action was taken in West Virginia recently, and where DuPont settled for, I think, $671 million. How can you say to these people, 250,000 people, that our water is safe to drink when so little testing is done on a few rats and mice? The research was done, I believe, by DuPont. No discredit to them. It's information. It's how you interpret it. How can you say to children, pregnant women, others that are vulnerable to compounds we know nothing about, how can you say with confidence that this water is safe to drink and we should not be concerned as citizens?
So let me address the first about why the public health goal was higher and then moved to a more conservative place. As the governor has mentioned, he asked us to rapidly understand these new chemicals and have our scientists look at all available data. And if you look at what we know about GenX, there's actually only one published study on it. We use that. We asked the EPA, hey, is there other studies, other data we should know about to inform our decision making on this? At that time, there wasn't any other ones that they had said it was forthcoming, so we put together, using our scientists on that first number. Then they shared with us some additional data that is proprietary data that I wish they were more forthcoming the first time, but we used that to inform our most conservative estimate here of our public health goal, which is where we are currently. And understand that goal is for lifetime exposure. That means 70 years of consumption at a particular level is where we want to see no adverse effects. So over 70 years. And so when I see King Moore's putting GenX in the water, when I see that we are testing and see those levels come down to near or below those very protective standards, and again, 70 years of risk, and we set it at a level for bottle-fed infants, that means such a high consumption of that water for someone's weight, as if they were going to have that level for 70 years. So we are being very conservative when we're putting out that level, but now we're seeing it being below that. So that is why I can feel comfortable saying folks can continue to drink the water. I think it is fair to say the science, though, continues to evolve here. We hope, and we have asked the CDC for more studies and more data, and we will, and this is a living process that we will go through together. But I think we want you to know that we are looking at every available piece of evidence that we can have, that we're trying to be as conservative as we can be to make recommendations, which is why I drank the water this morning, why I can continue to say as a physician and the leader of the department that folks can continue to drink the water, but also that we will continue to do work in this space to make sure we are leaving no stone unturned here for our folks.
Sure. Dr. Cole.
My
Hi.
name is Beth Marcasino, and I'm with Wilmington Stop GenX in our water. I have to ask you a question. Do you have any children?
I do. I have 2 young girls.
Okay, well, I would have had 2 children. I have a daughter. She just turned 5 yesterday. And I did have a son. And I was 24 weeks pregnant. And I lost my son. And I did drink the water. And he's no longer here. And to all the pregnant women that you're advising to drink this water, I don't think you should advise them to drink this water.
Well,
Because I drank that water while I was pregnant. And I would like to think that if I didn't drink that water, maybe my son would be here today. So I think that there needs to be more studies here.
we
And I
agree.
think that you, all of you up here, need to bring water to Wilmington. I think there needs to be a letter out to our citizens that you need to tell them, this should have been done 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks ago when you knew, you guys are elected officials, when you found out that our waters were tainted, you should have told us right then and there, instead of keep testing the water, keep testing the water. You knew that GenX was in our waters. You have a right to us citizens. You should have told us right then and there to not drink the water, instead of waiting and waiting and waiting to those levels to go down. Shame on each and every one of you to wait. You need to bring water to Wilmington. You know what all of us groups are going to do? We're going to bring water to Wilmington. You need to do that, not us groups. Us groups have been fighting for Wilmington. We've been doing your jobs. That's not right. How long have you been studying GenX? No, you haven't been studying GenX. You're taking your information from one study. One study. How long has GenX been around? Not long enough. Not long enough to tell you what that 70 years, no, GenX has not been around for 70 years to tell me what affects my child, what effects are going to be on my child or a bottle-fed child is going to be on. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, madam. But you know
So a couple
what?
of
That's
things.
not-
I
that's
really
not-
appreciate
that's
the
not-
frustration and the anger.
the frustration and anger are from all of us.
Sure.
All of us here.
Sure.
From 250,000 people that are getting poisoned. You know what? You're not drinking the water. You can go back to your little home and drink whatever water you want, but we're getting poisoned. This is what's going on here in Wilmington. So you can say whatever plan you want to for us. We have no idea. These are just air puffs that are just going on. We have no idea when those plans are going to be in action. But what we want right now is clean drinking water. We don't want more testing that what? Because right now we are paying for CFPUA's water that we can't drink, and we are buying bottled water. So we are asking you right now, our elected officials, to give us clean drinking water now. Because if you don't, guess what? Our communities, our groups are going to get it here with or without you. So, are you going to be on board with us or not? That's the question.
So I want to validate how angry I hear you being, and I want to express my sympathy both as a mom and a doctor for your loss of your son at 24 weeks. That is hard for anyone. And I can imagine when that happens, you will want to have answers. I would want to. If my daughter is turning 3 today, and if she were sick or something was happening to her, I'd want answers, and I would be angry too. But what I can say is, as a health official, as a doctor, and as a mom, is I have to base my decisions on the best science we have at this moment.
You have scientific proof on one study.
We have been very honest that the science on this is very limited, and so that we are working to, as fast as possible, get more science on this. And that is very...
In the meantime, you need to put out a letter stating that you don't have enough scientific information to tell 250 people
to drink this water?
So we have enough scientific information about the GenX compound to have been able to set a public health goal.
People in our community, then you're negligent, and so every single person up here can get held responsible for manslaughter, just like in Flint. Is that it? Does everybody up here want to be held responsible for manslaughter charges?
So we've set a public health goal that is extremely conservative, that we've been very happy to see that that GenX is not being discharged anymore into the water, that the governor's action. So I think it's my turn now. I hear you. I hear you. It's my turn now. So to make sure that, again, that there is no more GenX discharge into the water, but I want to make sure you understand that we do feel this very personally. As the governor said, we operate as if this was for our own family, and I do have little girls, and I think about that every day in my job. And so I want you to know that we are doing the best we possibly can with the limited understanding and the science that we have. And we have to go on the science that we do have. But what I can say is that we have set a public health goal here for GenX. We've seen those levels come down, and so I think folks can, again, be reassured they can continue to drink the water of what we know for GenX. Do we need more studies? Absolutely. Are we going to work as quickly as possible on that? Absolutely. Do I wish we knew more now? Absolutely. And so we will continue to do that. And again, I think it's important to continue to communicate on this. And I turn it over to my boss.
I understand your frustration, and I want to let you know that we're going to do everything we can to make sure we protect this water. The CDC is in the process of doing the study and to assess the health effects of what's going on. And we're going to look at the law and do everything that we can here to make sure that the water is protected. And I appreciate your input. And what I would like, too, is any other input that you have that you want to submit to us, any other instances you've heard about other than yourself, neighbors that you've talked to. We need to have all of that information, and we want to have all of that information to provide to our scientists and for the CDC. And I really appreciate you being here, and I appreciate everyone coming out today. And I will be back, and we'll continue our efforts. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.